Today, in this video, we are going to be taking a clip from David Sinclair's new podcast. He recently just released one that was relating to a lot of the substances we use in the community of biohacking and longevity or performance enhancement. In this video, he does claim a couple things about testosterone, growth hormone, and some of which are true and some of which are maybe a little bit of bias, but we're going to cover these topics and kind of discuss the nuance behind them.
All right, let's dive in by starting today with testosterone. Super popular subject, lots and lots of growth in testosterone replacement right now because of the fact that testosterone decreases as we age, and that's disconcerting to a lot of people.
Oh, for sure. After the age of 30 to 40, we lose about 1% of our testosterone levels, men and women. It's important for both sexes. The market has grown. So TRT, or testosterone replacement therapy, has grown from a few $100 million 10 years ago to multi-billion dollars now. And it's widely used not just to supplement for sexual dysfunction, which is a common side effect of low testosterone, but for other things.
So the growth of the testosterone business, if you want to call it, has grown precipitously the other way, as David has mentioned. This is very, very valid. This is very true. The reason this happens is because, quite frankly, the clinics are more readily available to general population, and the clinics are very unsupervised. They can prescribe anywhere from 500 milligrams to 100 milligrams and prescribe various peptides and hormones to include Anavar, Anadrol, Nandrolone, some of which are specifically anabolic androgenic steroids as opposed to any form of replacement therapy. So obviously it's going to become appealing to a more large and diverse group of people looking to improve their cognicity as well as function throughout the day.
That include mental health, building muscle, overall fitness, vitality.
And people swear by this. I mean, a lot of people, they do this. They say they feel younger. They say they feel more vigorous. They want to have sex again. They want to have sex all the time. There's an important distinction to make here, though, which is just because you feel younger does not necessarily mean you are reversing your biological aging.
Right. Let's make a clear distinction. We've talked about adversity mimetics. And in the last episode, we talked about the supplements and the kind of things that you can do in your life to mimic that. We want our bodies to be in a state of fear, that times are tough and they need to hunker down and survive. There are other types of things that we're going to talk about, which are abundance mimetics. Testosterone is one. We're going to get to growth hormone as well. These tell the body that times are good to build your muscle, to reproduce, go forth, multiply.
And that's what testosterone is doing. When we get testosterone replacement therapy, we are putting a substance back into our body that has been reduced, but which signals our body that times are good enough. It's okay to build muscle. It's okay to run around chasing woolly mammoths.
Yeah, well,
chasing the cave women around.
Exactly. Yes, that for sure. And that benefited our ancestors very well, but it didn't help them long term. What we now appreciate is the body has cycles of want and need and adversity, which is good for the long-term health of the body, and times where things are abundant, times to grow, reproduce, which are great short-term, but probably not great for long-term health and longevity either.
So David here kind of talks about it's probably not good to be using these things in the terms of longevity. While it might be acutely beneficial in youth when mate seeking and a bunch of other things related to energy needs and dynamics, he talks about potentially there could be issues with longevity when you're considering testosterone replacement or even growth hormone. I would argue this is likely to be the case. Now, he does say this quite frequently, and I think just by nature of humans listening, we tend to skip over certain things that David does point out very obviously, in which these are all basically animal studies claiming, the loss in lifespan due to the usage of testosterone and growth hormone. But what is also good to note is what I had mentioned before. Clinics are more readily available than ever before now, and ultimately those clinics are prescribing doses of testosterone and growth hormone which aren't prescribed normally within a setting that's appropriate. They are usually prescribing mini cycles at 250 milligrams or higher to their patients. So yeah, I could see life expectancy decreasing a little bit just because of a higher testosterone dose than a baseline need might actually, or an average human might actually need. So that's sensible. And the reason that might be both testosterone and growth hormone is because they stimulate the growth pathways in the body. David puts it into layman's terms here and labels it as abundance mimetics. This really is just saying that these certain compounds are contributing to growth pathways within the body, like mTOR, IGF-1, and growth hormone. They're stimulating a lot of processes which would result in cell division, the shortening of telomeres, which are the genetic strands that we use to create that cell division. Or hyperplasia. And so we're kind of seeing like, man, maybe this would age us because essentially you're just accelerating aging. The reason your skin gets better is because skin cells will turn over faster. Well, you don't have unlimited skin cells, so that growth hormone is calling upon resources in which are finite. You're essentially using premium fuel that will burn at a higher and faster rate than just a regular octane fuel, which would burn at a slower rate, but maybe not as good as performance as premium fuel, if that makes sense. So here David pulls up some excellent research citing the long-term use of testosterone replacement therapy and some of the benefits as well as some of the side effects from sleep apnea and on. The benefits are numerous. There is a ton of benefits to be had from testosterone and growth hormone, in which I'll kind of talk about just shortly after I talk about this. But the negatives he talks about are certainly true. Sleep apnea, testicle shrinkage, promoting of the prostate growth. These are all things that do happen in all actuality. You know, as someone who's been on TRT and higher for much longer than the average individual my age, I would assume that, you know, if you're watching this and you've been on testosterone replacement therapy or even higher, you'll have noticed you urinate a lot more. You wake up like 5 or 6 times a night to go to the bathroom. This is very true. You'll realize your balls shrink, and David kind of puts it into a negative light here. I don't mind. It makes the other thing look bigger, if you know what I mean. And the other portion of it is sleep apnea. I have never snored in my life until I've reached, about 240 pounds relative to the testosterone replacement therapy. So the sleep apnea, that's a little bit vague. You know, if you're using a therapeutic dose, say at 90 milligrams a week of testosterone, I doubt you're going to be able to put on enough water via the estrogen modulation needed, or the angiotensin modulation needed to cause sleep apnea. But if you're using doses exceeding 200 milligrams, it would be very feasible that, one, you'd gain a lot of lean muscle, but you'd also put on a lot of edema weights, water weights, and change your fluid dynamics, and even your larynx can swell from edema, in which I've covered in previous videos before. So it is something that's possible, but I doubt it's going to be possible in the realm of actual therapeutic dosing of testosterone replacement therapy. And if it is happening in that range, then someone has some sort of other issue relating to their estrogen metabolism or something of that nature. And what I was talking about with the health benefits, I think that testosterone replacement therapy specifically would be really beneficial for individuals who are seeking fat loss, or who are diabetic, or who are lacking the lean muscle mass and declining ultimately to a state of sarcopenia or even worse. So they are very useful in those contexts, I will say. But if you're a healthy individual who doesn't necessarily need those benefits, you know, more blood sugar modulation, better lean muscle mass compositions, better stability and balance. If you're an individual that doesn't have any sort of comorbidities to go along with a lower testosterone, would using testosterone truly benefit you besides the accrual of more muscle tissue? Probably not, in all honesty.
Okay, so let's talk about what actually happens when our testosterone lowers, and what happens, importantly, when we put it back. Because this is helping a lot of people with a lot of problems that are coincidental with aging.
Oh, for sure. There have been a lot of studies, millions of dollars, and many thousands of people treated with TRT, as it's called. Shelley Basin, who's a colleague of mine at Harvard, has done a lot of these studies, and he's found some improvements, short-term improvements. So, of course, improvements in libido, but also he shows a dose-dependent increase in skeletal muscle mass. So you get bigger muscles. You got more power. You can climb stairs. You can walk further in 6 minutes. Improves aerobic capacity. These are all good things that he sees, but actually it's not all good news. There are some side effects and may actually impact longevity. So some of the risks of TRT, there's worse sleep apnea. You can actually get larger breasts. Little known fact is your testosterone can be turned into estrogen, which is a risk for men particularly. You can have what's called benign prostatic hyperplasia, so bigger prostate, need to go to the bathroom at night. Shrinking testicles, not something I think many of us would want. And increasing red blood cell protection, which could lead to blood clots.
And if you're already predisposed to prostate cancer, you have cancerous growth already, this could actually aggravate the tumors.
Yes. And actually, the opposite is true. If you look at the history of eunuchs, they live longer. And so it may actually be that supplementing with testosterone is not conducive to longer life.
Okay. So this is an important principle here, and we're going to come back to this a couple of times on this episode, which is just because something makes you feel good today, and just because it might even be medically beneficial to you today, that does not necessarily mean it is addressing the causes of biological aging. It may be fixing something that you have a problem with. It may be improving even your quality of life right now. Long term, that's not the same thing as reducing or eliminating biological aging.
Yeah, let's go back to the main concepts here today, which are that adversity mimetics are great. Things that mimic lack of food and a lot of exercise. But these abundance mimetics are probably a problem long term, even though they make you feel great short term.
Is the idea of abundance mimetics correct? I would say and venture to say, yeah, it's pretty correct. Our body was never meant to be in a constant state of growth. That's pretty obvious. Anyone who knows how a cancer cell operates would say, yeah, it's not appropriate to grow. But I would argue also that some of this is David's bias. He does prefer the extreme end of the longevity route, even if that would be a detriment to his livability or his ability to really thrive as a human being. He would rather take the 10 years on the back end versus have more of a stronger vitality 10 years on the front end. And a lot of individuals have also hypothesized that the decline in sex hormone that naturally happens with age is just some sort of clunky evolutionary trait left behind to improve our rates of longevity, but also to improve the dynamics of social situations and how we operate as communities. It is theorized that, the decline in sex hormones is usually paired with an inclination of wisdom and sort of forward thinking, as opposed to just that goal seeking in the immediate time range and chronological age of someone.
Okay. And that's sort of giving away the punchline for HGH, but we need to talk about HGH as well. Human growth hormone, also something that is really popular right now. People supplementing with human growth hormone to address things like decreased exercise capacity, decreased bone density, decreased muscle mass, and increased body fat. This works, right? For those things, this HGH is helpful.
Well, no question. Short term, you'll feel better, you'll grow muscle, you'll have less fat on growth hormone therapy. The science says that this may not be good for long-term health and wellness. Going back to the original studies of Cynthia Kenyon, which we talked about in episode 1, those mutant worms had low levels of growth hormone and insulin-like growth hormone signaling.
And they live longer.
Twice as long. And this has been reproduced also in mice and even in humans. There are the Laron dwarfs we were talking about earlier. These are smaller people that have low levels of growth hormone, or actually IGF-1, one of the versions of this pathway. They are relatively resistant against cancer and heart disease and may even live longer. Conversely, if you're supplementing with growth hormone long-term, the chance is that you're having the opposite, that you feel great, but long-term you might have even greater risk of cancer and heart disease.
And people who are on HGH for various reasons. One of the immediate side effects, even before we get to sort of like the longevity implications, is sore joints, carpal tunnel syndrome.
Right. This is the kind of thing that does happen. Now, I just want to be clear. There are some benefits to bringing the levels back up to normal, okay? But going too high, which a lot of people do if they want additional benefits, that's where I think the main risk comes from.
Another risk immediate is increased insulin resistance.
That's true. We get high levels of blood sugar, we get high cholesterol, carpal tunnel, edema, so buildup of fluid, joint pain.
Okay, so soreness in your joints, insulin resistance. Another one is an increase in the likelihood of type 2 diabetes because of that insulin resistance. All of this actually kind of sounds like symptoms of aging.
Right. And that's the risk. The animal studies are telling us that growth hormone will tell your body that times are good, abundance mimetic, and that's not good for long-term effects of health. And probably what's going on is some acceleration of aging.
Okay, but this isn't to say, again, I think this really, we don't want to say human growth hormone is bad, testosterone is bad. People need to have a naturally healthy level of these hormones.
So is growth hormone causing aging? He mentions a lot of things from arthritis to insulin resistance to diabetes. Now, what they don't do is stratify different populations. They're broadly speaking, and I think this is a massive failure on their end to really illustrate the true potential of these products. I'm not one to argue that growth hormone will not accelerate aging. I think it will in any capacity, but the comorbidities that will come along with administering growth hormone, aren't so actually what they're claiming them to be if you are a certain type of person. So there needs to be some sort of stratification, some sort of specificity to who they're talking to. If you're talking to the average layman's who doesn't go to the gym, doesn't usually have a good diet, doesn't typically partake in any sort of other longevity pathways or mimetics, if you will, yeah, they're probably going to suffer from the usage of growth hormone, and over time, that administration of it will lead to these comorbidities. But if you are an athlete, if you are someone who is consistently habitualized with the healthy mannerisms of daily life, then ultimately growth hormone will lead to far, far greater outcomes as far as lean body mass accrual, lean fat mass decreasing rapidly, and ultimately just a better state of well-being. There needs to be, like I said, a stratification from these sort of general populations, the 90% of the normal Westerner who is typically obese, if not morbidly obese, and ultimately the athletes who are habitualized, who are doing things day to day that would be considered healthy in moderation. So there's a large difference here, a large disparity. David also goes into talking about shortly after this how to increase these things naturally, which again, I think is a failure on their part. Yes, they are increased naturally through some things like exercise and stress related endeavors that Sinclair talks about. But unfortunately, those things are very acute. We see that testosterone will raise or IGF-1 will raise shortly after some sort of resistance training bout when it's a heavy compound movement, which he talks about. But that's only for about 45 to 2 hours. I mean, it's not very significant enough to cause any sort of skeletal muscle growth or any sort of sex, characteristics that we'd be seeking. So ultimately, that's my opinion. I think that it is true to say testosterone, growth hormone, all of the other things we use in the bodybuilding industry are ultimately going to lead to detriments within longevity and health and especially well-being long term. I think acutely, they're very good to pursue athletic endeavors, to earn an income, to provide yourself with some sort of upper hand to a situation in which you might need it. Maybe it's a business you're cultivating from the ground up and you want to have high dopamine function, very dopaminergic to have that goal seeking, or maybe you're in the state of mind in which you want some wisdom and calmness, and ultimately that would lead to lower testosterone levels. So you can modulate these things depending on what you need. I don't think it's such a clear and flat, hey, this is aging, this is not aging, don't do this, do that. I think, with the current world and the way we have it, we can have the ability to modulate hormones, peptides, and even neural agents to get to better positions within life. And just saying flat out that one thing is bad versus the other doesn't account for all the inter-individualities within individuals, as well as the stratification of athletes versus non-athletes versus entrepreneurs versus who the fuck knows, right? So thank you for watching. I hope this video is insightful. Deuces. Have a great day. Like, comment down below.